Welcome, everybody, to the, what day is it? April 3rd, workshop meeting of the Board of Education. Although this is a workshop meeting, we do have a couple of items of business that will be discussed and voted upon. We are resuming public session. There is nothing to report out of executive session. And what time are we resuming? 7:39? And just as a reminder, emergency exits are located to the rear of the building, to my right, to the audience left. In the event of emergency, please leave in an orderly fashion through these exits. This is a smoke-free school district. Smoking is not permitted in the building or anywhere on school grounds. This is also a hate-free and bully-free school district. And welcome to our meeting. So let's begin. Would everyone please rise for the pledge? And Mr. Clifford, would you please lead?
Sure. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. And first on the agenda is the superintendent's report.
Thank you, President Felice. All right, thank you, President Felice, and thank you all for coming out on the stormy Wednesday evening. I'm going to get right to it. First and foremost, something fun. Last Friday night, I had the pleasure of attending the middle school production of The Descendants, which was simply awesome. For those who are not familiar, basically the storyline is all of the evil characters from Disney movies. The queens have kids who have to go to high school with the good kids. It was really an awesome, sort of a spectacle, just not in terms of their sets, the amount of kids who performed, the awesome crew of kids that worked behind the scenes, and of course the awesome cast. There was so much talent on that stage, and again, a great source of Clipper pride. So I just want to give a shout out to the middle school staff, especially Mr. Lochner, who directed the play. And I got to speak to his father, who was a retired superintendent from Brentwood, who's currently serving an interim gig in Amagansett out east. But he just spoke very highly of the South Country School District and how happy his son is to be a part of it. That same Friday night, I had the great pleasure of attending the junior prom over down at the Belport Country Club. And I can't say it enough, but our students are fantastic. They look great. They're all having a great time. So it was great to spend a little bit of time with them at the country club and to make my little cameo to take some selfies with the students. But again, a fantastic night, and a big shout out to the high school staff and their advisors for organizing such a wonderful event. The following morning, again, a lot more Clipper pride. I had the privilege of going down to the high school to attend the Parent Heart Watch heart screenings that took place this past Saturday. 340 students were screened for free, and those screenings included EKGs, sonograms where the sonograms are called for, and some CPR training, but all of it was kind of educational in nature. 160 volunteers from the medical profession were there to provide these screenings. And that's just a photo with myself and a couple of the students who are holding up their EKGs, who are all kind of marveling at the data that it provided. Of the 340 students that were screened, 95 had a second look with sonograms, and there were 5 abnormalities found. So this is, as much as we don't want abnormalities to be found, it's a great thing that we provided these screenings for those 5 individual kids. We'll follow up. This also included a consultation with a pediatric cardiologist. It's a great event. I want to thank Mr. Hayes for organizing it, and Ms. Karen Akampora, who represents Parent Heart Watch. It's a non-for-profit company that does this in various school districts. But again, 340 students were screened. The following Monday, I had the privilege of going to the high school to attend the second chamber concert that was actually rescheduled due to the snow back in the, I wouldn't say the winter, I was going to say the fall. But so many talented musicians on our stage. It was chamber strings and choirs and clarinets, flute and percussion ensembles, and our all-state performers. So I just want to give a big shout out and my appreciation to our music staff, Mr. Finnegan, Ms. Wasson, Ms. Valenti, Ms. Grunenberg, and of course Ms. Hartman, for inspiring such great talent. And once again, for this current year, South Country was named the best community for music. Another great accolade for our school district. And again, music thrives in South Country. Some other South Country happenings to go through. We started our sort of college and career days at each of our elementary schools. Last year, I had the privilege of visiting each of the schools and talk about college and careers. This year, we partnered with our Suffolk County Police, who did a presentation for our elementary school students. I want to give them a special shout out and also acknowledge the passing of a police officer in New York City tragically last week. Our heart breaks and goes out for his family, and we want to make sure that our law enforcement officials and police officers are safe. This will be followed by a College and Career Day fair on April 12th at the high school, featuring over 100 colleges and various different representatives from different careers. This is open to all students. It's a student-only event happening at the high school. The middle school will also have a College and Career Day on May 3rd, so we're excited about that. We also sponsored our GSA club, that's the Gay and Straight Alliance clubs, at both middle school and high school, to attend the LGBTQ Network Conference with their advisors. So I want to give a shout out to Dr. Jeffries, Ms. Coyne, Ms. Carano, and Ms. Gonzalez is one of our school psychologists who attended the conference with the students, where they got to commiserate with other students and sort of feel empowered and again create that sense of belonging. Another source of clip of pride. And I wanted to close out with our Lego robotics team from the middle school placed first in robotic design. This is a great accomplishment. They competed against 26 other teams. The competition was held at William Floyd. So big shout out to those students who had to sort of defend their robot design, actually have to complete some tasks. So shout out to Mr. Kanjura at the middle school for advising the team to this victory. Another source of clip of pride on the robotics level. Talking about science, we have another thing that's happening next week, which is the solar eclipse. So I felt obligated to talk a little bit about it and what our plans are in terms of ensuring that our community observes the eclipse safely. I'll give you some information. That's the trajectory of the eclipse as the sun sort of rotates. I apologize, science teachers, it rotates or revolves, rotates over the night sky. But it starts at 12, for our area, the eclipse starts at 2:12 p.m. with maximum coverage at 3:26 p.m. and it ends around 4:37 p.m. We're going to have 90% coverage, meaning the sun will be covered by the shadow of the earth for 90% of the time. So the question arises, when is it safe to look directly at the sun? Thank you, Trustee Barry. Never. It's never okay to look at the sun. So it's not that the eclipse makes it more dangerous. You should never look directly at the sun. But what happens is, as this event starts sort of happening in the sky, people just get curious, and because it's 90% covered, you think that somehow it's safer, and it's not. So we're going to be talking to our students about safety in terms of the appropriate way to observe the eclipse. In our science classes at elementary schools, I'm going to be sending out a robo email on Friday night to our community just saying, hey, let's be safe, because we're not canceling any after-school activities or school, because it's a great learning opportunity. And I'll be sending a robocall out Sunday night, just reminding parents to remind their kids not to look directly at the sun. But to help enjoy observing the eclipse, we're going to be distributing these really cool eclipse glasses to every student and staff member in our district. And I have one for each trustee as well. I can't see out of them.
Oh yeah, you look cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I do have one for each trustee. So if you try to look through these things, you can't, that's how powerful they are. What's cool about them is this allows you to look up at the sun and you'll actually see the sphere. So it's pretty cool. So all the kids will be getting these in the afternoon on Monday. For our high school students, this eclipse happens after dismissal, happens sort of right after dismissal for Frank P. Long in the middle school. But for the elementary schools, they should be on their way home. So again, encourage parents that no one should be looking directly at the sun. Please pick up these glasses. They're also available for free at the public library.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
It's my understanding, and I don't know for sure, but isn't it going to be dark out at 3:30, 4 o'clock during the eclipse?
No, so the last solar eclipse I experienced, it doesn't get totally dark, it just gets darker.
Darker, so
Yeah,
like
it's
dusk.
90% coverage.
So I'm saying, it's my understanding it's going to be dark, so that's why I'm asking how kids can be out on the field in a sport when it's dark.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's not gonna be dark.
It's not going to be that dark.
It almost looks like, the illusion is, it almost gets like brown, this brown hue, but it doesn't get pitch black, because the sun, again, it's only 90% covered. But even in a full eclipse, the last full eclipse I experienced was at Robert Moses Beach, which is pretty amazing sight to behold, because a humpback whale was actually breaching during the eclipse. It's a true story.
Which is amazing, because I actually heard somebody tell the exact same story about being on a Robert Moses when a whale breached during the eclipse, so that's pretty interesting.
I was there too, so I'm not making it up. But it never got totally dark. It just got weird. I don't know if weird is a scientific word, but I think you can appreciate what I'm trying to say.
I don't remember.
Something less exciting coming up next week is our assessments. The beginning of our ELA assessments are actually happening next week, the windows 9th through the 11th. It's still remarkable to me that it's already April 9th next week. We're doing computer-based testing across the board. Students have been practicing on their Chromebooks, and this affects grades 3 and 5. That's next week for the ELA. 6 and 8 will be April 16th and 17th, followed by mathematics at the end of April and the beginning of May, and our science tests in May as well. What I want to emphasize about state assessments is that for many years there's sort of like this negative connotation when it came to the administration of tests and over-testing kids. There's a couple of points I want to make. First and foremost, we want to create like a real sample size of our students and where they're at in terms of their achievement. So we would love to get an accurate assessment of where our students are. And by students, I mean all of our students. We're encouraging our students to actually come in and not opt out for the test so that we can get a true sense of where our students are performing. The opt-out rate is greater in the middle school, because I do think middle school kids get a little savvy, they're like, I don't really have to take this test. But I think it's important to sort of understand where you're performing. Students are regularly assessed, as you can learn a little bit more about when Beth Doyle does a presentation in a few moments. So they're always assessed year-round, but this is an important benchmark. And as much as we like to tell kids, because we don't want them to stress about this, that when you look at your life in totality, these tests are meaningless, it's good to see where you're at. And it really is good to try your best and to see exactly where you fit in and how you measure up to other kids in the state, because these are New York State tests. The other embedded tests that we do within the school are normed against the national averages. But it is an important benchmark, and as much as it doesn't matter, it sort of matters in terms if you really want to sort of get a sense of where you're at compared to other kids in your test. State tests are also a graduation requirement. All students must pass 5 Regents exams at least to graduate high school in New York State. So I think it's good that they get testing endurance and they get used to what it feels like to sit for a standardized test. And whether your post-high school plans include enrollment, employment, or enlistment, assessments are an integral part of that life. And again, there's certification exams. If you want to do a trade, if you want to enlist in our armed forces, there are entrance exams, there's police exams for law enforcement. So I think we have to start shifting our mindsets. We're basically saying opt into New York State assessments. We'll be distributing this via email, perhaps a mailing, and we want our students to show us what they know. Have pride in your achievement, do your best, and for number 1, again, get a sense of where you're at academically, and it helps inform the district in terms of how best we can support you. So as these assessments come up, we're going to be encouraging our teachers to encourage their students and their families to please have their kids come in and sit for these exams. And aside from all the things I mentioned, a great way to keep track of all the things that are happening is to follow our various social media platforms that include many different stories from different buildings in our district, including athletics. So please go to our website. You can stay in touch, number 1, by going to our community portal and subscribing to our email messages, or all of our social media links are there, that link on our homepage of our website, so you can follow the various social media handles. Of course, there's a superintendent's corner, which opens up a monthly entry, as well as my contact information, my social media handles, as well as my weekly update that I provide the school district on a weekly basis on Friday nights. And that concludes my superintendent's report. Thank you, as always, for your continued support of our school districts.
Thank you very much. All right, so we'll begin with the trustee and advisory committee reports. Trustee Barry, would you like to begin?
I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that were brought up. Obviously, we made a big hay last week about the athletics and the winter athletics, but it was so great to see the robotics club placing, and maybe there's a good opportunity to recognize them
Yes.
as well in the future. And the other thing is, I read with great pride the article in the Advance that you highlighted there about Officer Vargas and his sister Daniela and the careers in police and boxing, and I did not know. I've read many articles about his boxing and things along those lines, but I did not know he was a South Country. I knew he had boxed in South Country, but I did not know that he's a graduate.
And his sister's a graduate and a teacher at Brookhaven.
Exactly. So
Great.
I thought that was fantastic to see.
Trustee Kavanaugh.
I'd just like to echo Joe's point about the robotics club. I think that's really cool.
I'm willing to
Trent.
that.
Okay. Let's go back, Karen, come back to you.
Nothing.
Okay, I think.
I have nothing.
Ditto what you said. Ditto what you said about the Descendants. That was a real hoot. And the chamber concert was just breathtaking.
All right, and for the Board of Education, we have circulated a letter that three of us worked on, myself, Vice President Hayes, and Trustee Barry, on sending our feelings about the state budget to Senator Murray and Assemblyman Joe DiStefano. There we included our endorsement or rejection of the proposals for the New York State School Board Association, along with our feelings about the magnetic door mandate. So that letter is now complete, has been sent out to the Board of Trustees. If there's any other corrections, additions that you'd like to see, if you could let me know before the morning, so that we can send that out, since the budget was extended until tomorrow, since it's not going to be passed by April 1st, as April 1st is passed. But we want to get our feelings known into our local representatives. All right?
Oh, I'm sorry, is there, like, next year, I mean, we're gonna try to do, I just feel like it's a little late, right? So, I mean, do we have a plan to reform the legislative committee so that our legislative priorities
We
can get to
certainly
them?
can try
in a-
that if we have volunteers, yes.
And, yeah, it just seems like it could be any day we get the budget, and I think some of the non-financial items are probably almost settled. So, I mean, I think it's good to get our feelings on record with our legislators, but I would just hope next year as we go forward, we are working with them and letting them know our feelings a little bit sooner in the process.
Yep, as long as we have volunteers for the committees, that's the plan. Okay. Next for discussion is items for action is actually it's not action yet. The budget presentation for expense and revenue update. And that will be you again? All right,
Participation.
I'm sorry,
Workshop, sorry.
what's that?
Disregard. I answered my own question.
Oh, okay. You need this?
Thank you. You can't always see the three anymore on the pen. All right, so this represents our sixth budget presentation of the budget season, which is a revenue and expenditure update. One of the things that sort of is a challenge is the fact that the governor hasn't released the final budget yet, which puts school districts in the blinds because we have to proceed based on the initial budget proposals, and that's what we've been doing. Again, to go over timeline, today we're going to go over expenses and our revenues and update the trustees on where we're at with that. And ultimately, we'll have our budget adaptation meeting on April 17th. In terms of timeline, we're in the final stages of finalizing our budget, looking at the different budget lines, looking at staffing before we present it on the 17th to the board for adaptation. Again, I just wanted to go over all the presentations so far. Our first presentation had to do with basically some long-term planning and some of the challenges that we face. Basically, the biggest challenges, like we said, were some of the considerations, I should say, is ongoing review of our programs to reduce expenditures to the greatest extent possible. Alternatives to revenue sources. I'm happy to say that through Compass Unity, we're able to secure a $125,000 grant for our drug prevention programs. We were able to get the recovery grant for about $100,000 to deal with mental health. So we're always kind of striving to seek out different revenue sources through donations like the South Country Education Foundation, etc. We also have to consider the cuts to the foundation aid as they were proposed by the governor, the end of our federal funds, and a drop in building aid, which may involve the strategic use of reserves to help get us through the next year and possibly the year after. And we're going to continue engaging capital improvement projects, which generates aid in the form of building aid. So far, since last year, we've had 2 capital reserve votes of $2.6 and $2.2 million to do work here in the district that will ultimately generate building aid. These processes are slow because, again, they all require state approval, and that process is slow. We're also in the process of energy performance contract, which represents about approximately $9 million worth of work in a budget neutral way. And again, will generate building aid in the future. We added the capital transfer budget line to our budget of $1 million per year to continually engage in capital improvements. In the future, when interest rates are different, we may want to consider future bond proposals. We're not there yet, so I'm not suggesting it, but it's a consideration that will come across. And we're also going to be proposing May capital reserve vote to use the remaining funds in our, we have 2 capital reserves, an old one that was established where we had about $937,000 remaining. We want to use those remaining funds to address the auditorium. We'll talk about that in our next presentation. In our next presentation, we talked about the tax cap calculation and our tax levy. The tax cap, which is based on an 8-point formula, or 8-part formula for this school district, is 2.7%, not 2%, so that's a tax cap that we're working with. A final tax levy, or a proposed tax levy, will be presented to the board on April 17th. In our third meeting, we talked about 3 sets of codes, the 1,000 code, which is the administration, transportation, 5,000 code, and unallocated, which represents all the costs associated with employee entitlements and benefits, debt, and government obligations. We then followed that up with our 4th presentation, which talked about curriculum instruction, which is a 2,000 code, which is one of our larger codes that encompasses everything from salaries to supplies to all those things that we use in our buildings. And then last week, we talked about staffing, not last week or during our last presentation. But basically, when we look at staffing, we're still looking to enhance our instructional programs while maintaining our class size. Additional staffing is being proposed for the following reasons. One, we're going to add reading and math support to the elementary schools. We're looking to streamline the delivery of reading instruction and interventions at the middle school. We're looking to add 1 additional special class to better serve our community. These special classes tend to be small in number, but it actually keeps our kids within our schools and not in outside placements. And again, we want to give more student choice in terms of electives and AP courses at our secondary levels. And again, finally, to better serve our high school students by the addition of a guidance component that's going to focus on college and career readiness, as well as job placement. So all these things we're able to do because, one of the things that we did that was really forward-looking was not use these federal funds to add additional staff or additional programs. And that's why, unlike other school districts, we're not looking to make massive cuts. We're able to sustain our staff, maintain our class sizes, which is something that we're proud of and will continue to stress in our future budget negotiations. Again, just to recap our considerations, again, we want to ensure the budget development process is consistent with our board priorities, which means we want to make sort of a budget proposal that is sustainable for the foreseeable future. One of the misconceptions that you'll see a little later today is when we make increases to certain budget lines or reductions in others, a lot of it doesn't represent additions or cuts. A lot of it is corrections in our budget. That said, there are going to be increases to budget lines that include but are not limited to inflation, contractual obligations, entitlements, staffing, fuel costs. And we continually do a line-by-line analysis of our budget to see where we can make reductions while proposing a budget that's going to be sustainable and allow for contingencies in the future and have enough funds to operate the school district. The use of the reserves is an important component of the budgetary planning. We do use our reserves as revenue sources with the idea is to use them and then replenish them at the end of the year. This year, we're proposing to use the reserves in a little bit differently to account for the cuts in foundation aid, which I'll explain in a future slide. And one of the things we did starting last year is in June, we'll make a more comprehensive reserve plan for the foreseeable future, because we'll have a better sense of where we're landing at the end of the school year in June. And again, ultimately, the goal of the budget is to meet the demands of the school districts in terms of operating costs, ensure that the school district is in a good financial position to address unforeseen costs, and to have an appropriate fund balance to mitigate future challenges. We also want to ensure that our larger community is considered. We're proposing the final tax levy. And again, this process is ongoing, and the final budget, along with the proposed tax levy, will be presented on April 17th. So first, I'm going to go over an update on our revenue side of the budget. As you know, balanced budget has to have equal revenue, equal expenditures. So this is our latest sort of update as to where we stand in terms of our revenue. And all this revenue represents our general fund. Again, the state aid that's included here is based upon the governor's initial proposal. First and foremost, the tax levy that you see here is based on a 2.7% tax cap. That's where we're at right now. We'll propose that final tax levy proposal at the April 17 board meeting. But that difference you see in tax levy from year to year represents 2.7%. In terms of state aid, our state aid, or our foundation aid, for the first time ever was cut by 1%. On average, our state aid was increased by 3% year after year. We had forecast a 1% increase, which we thought was conservative, but as you saw in the governor's proposal, that aid was actually cut by 1%. The actual drop in state aid also includes the drop in building aid, within the disparity between our bond payments and the building aid. So it's a little over $2 million in all, but that's what's accounted for in our state aid, and that's where you see a decrease. Our miscellaneous revenue actually increased a little bit because of interest. Interest can be your foe or it could be your friend. Since we have money in bank accounts, our interest rates are high, we've been yielding more interest, so you see a little bit of a bump in our miscellaneous revenue on that end. This also includes our Medicaid reimbursements, rental incomes, and donations. Federal funds are not part of this budget. We actually removed the federal funds in last year's budget. That was a big correction we did last year. So it doesn't really impact the budget in the current year or in the proposed year. And the way we use or utilize our federal funds this year is we use them to offset expenses at the end of the year to hopefully have an appropriate amount of fund balances to, again, replenish our reserves. And finally, the use of reserves are going to be used to offset expenditures in a very deliberate manner. You got to remember that reserves have to be used for the specific purpose. The biggest change here is the TRS contribution reserve. We're using $1 million more of those reserves in our proposed budget. We typically spend around $5 million a year for TRS contributions. So the idea is to use it more because they're adequately funded at the present time. And the hope is next year, and perhaps with a restoration of foundation aid, we'll be able to replenish the use of the reserves. But this is the first time, like we mentioned last year, the use of reserves is sort of a roller coaster. There are years where you're going to replenish them, and our reserve balances will grow, and some years they'll maybe decline slightly. But this is our proposal in terms of the revenue side of our budget. Going over to the expenditure side of the budget, there's a little bit of a misconception here.
Mr. Santana, I have
Yes.
a quick question. Do you by any chance know of the federal money that we moved into or we're reporting now into the special aid fund? Do you know how much money that is?
It's approximately $4 million this year.
Thank you.
So budget line increases, and again, I don't expect anybody to be able to read this. This is sort of a summary of all these main budget categories. We provided the trustees with details in our update. But there's like multiple factors that represent increases in expenditures that aren't always increases in our spending. For example, there are certain things that, are a true reflection of the spending, like inflation, cost of living increases, supplies, staffing, contractual obligations. But we also have budget line corrections or recoding that sort of cancel each other out when you look at the reduction side of the budget process. We're also looking to replace and purchase equipment. We also shifted, one of the big shifts we did was having our Chromebook replacement plan go through BOCES. So you'll see a big decrease in one line, but it increased in another. So to go over again the codes, you know, the 1,000 codes, 2,000 codes, 5,000 codes, 9,000 codes are what are represented here, which basically are all the costs associated with running the district. In all, if we sum up every increase, it comes up to 8.5, a little over $8.5 million increase, which is kind of a misconception, because what's important is gonna be the net difference budget to budget. So let's look at our reductions. Our reductions, again, don't necessarily represent, you know, cuts to programs or cuts to expenditures, but rather some budgetary corrections and reductions in budget lines based on what our actual spending was. So in this sort of round of the budget process, a large part of this was budget line corrections, recoding, the continual analysis of our expenditures, our debt service commitments, which are changing, and again, our strategic use of reserves. And, you know, so even with these reductions and increases, we are still proposing a budget that's going to cover our operating costs and allow for contingencies. And to get a little bit more specific, again, the budget is a tool. It doesn't represent actuals. That helps us manage our expenditures. Reductions don't represent cuts to programs, so I want to keep emphasizing that. The amount in each budget code represents the maximum the school district can spend, allowing for unforeseen changes. So again, these amounts, when you look at budget lines, don't represent what we're actually spending, but the maximum amount we can spend. In some cases, you can make budgetary transfers. For example, on tonight's business, there is a budgetary transfer to account for an increased expense for our graduation. We have to replace the dais, because the dais is rotting out. We certainly want a structurally safe dais, so that's when you'll see some budget transfer lines throughout the year. Once the school budget is adopted, the goal is to operate the school district in the most efficient way possible, to be frugal, to keep a watchful eye on our expenditures, to make sure that we're not hitting these maximums, and that we have appropriate fund balance at the end of the year, which is our monies left over. Our fund balances are used, again, to reserve to replenish the monies used from our reserves, and as per our district reserve plan. And just as a point of clarification, New York State allows for up to a 4% unassigned fund balance, which means 4% of your budget can be left over to use for purposes in the upcoming school year. And the rest of that, above and beyond that 4%, has to be used to fund our reserves. And that's what our hope is to do. Again, use and replenish. In all, we're looking at about $6.4 million in reduction so far. So when we look at the net difference, budget to budget, as of March 6th, 2024, we were looking at a budget of about almost $146 million compared to the $140 million budget we had last year. Through this budgetary process, as of April 3rd, which is tonight, we've been able to reduce that to $143 million. So that's a $2.1 million increase budget to budget, which represents a 1.51 increase comparing budget to budget, which when you think about the cost of living, inflation, is pretty reasonable. And so we're kind of proud of our work, and we're able to sort of work to reach this sort of conclusion. Although this number may change before the 17th, but as of today, this is where we're at. I don't want to confuse the public or the trustees. We're not proposing a 1.51% tax levy. The tax levy, it only represents the part of our revenue that comes from our taxpayers. That tax cap is 2.7%. So when we work our numbers out, and when we look at to see if anything changes between now and the 17th in terms of the governor's proposed budget, we'll readdress those numbers, and we'll propose the final tax levy on April 17th. Right now, as it stands, when you look at a budget-to-budget comparison, we're looking at an increase of about 1.5% in our overall budget. And again, next week, or 2 weeks, I keep saying next week, in 2 weeks we'll have our budget adaptation, we'll have our final presentation where we summarize everything, followed by our budget hearing on May 8th and our budget vote on May 21st. We're also, in our next presentation, we'll go over our propositions. Going to be 3 propositions we're excited about. One will be actually the board election and the budget vote. We're proposing to expand the range of our buses at no cost to the district, or no additional cost to the district. Transportation does cost something. And again, proposition to use the remaining funds in our old or capital reserve. Excited about all those things. That concludes that presentation. Open for questions. Yes, Trustee Hayes.
I just want to clarify with the amount of money that you have in this budget, you're confident that's enough not only to maintain the programs and class sizes that we've had, but also to accommodate these targeted initiatives that you were talking about in terms of, and that we're gonna hear more about, I think. But you've got enough money in that budget to do that.
That is correct, trustee Hayes.
Okay, and the important thing here is to look at really the bottom line of the total amount of money it's gonna take to operate the district compared to what was anticipated like in last year's budget. And not so much the line by line items, because sometimes there needs to be transfers between line items
Right.
in order to cover the expenses that are needed. Is
Correct.
that how this works? Okay.
That is correct, yep.
All right, so, based on that, I think your percentage increase appears to be about 1.5% over last year.
That's correct.
Okay.
As it stands tonight, we're gonna keep chipping away at it, obviously, we have a couple more weeks, and we're gonna really be looking at staffing, and then, again, it's, the process doesn't end until it ends.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Kavanaugh, trustee Kavanaugh.
Superintendent, this is kind of a structural question, and I understand that what we're trying to do here is to standardize the budget and have proper items on the proper line items, and also I understand your point that it's very important to look at the bottom line, take the increases and the decreases, and compare to last year's. So my question, maybe this is for Ms. Segui, I'm not sure. I'm looking at page 7 and page 8, which are the increases and the decreases. Why am I seeing the same line items reflected as having an increase and also reflected as having a decrease?
Great question, that I can answer.
Oh, good, never
So
mind, I'll
those,
get back to
if,
you.
if we listed all the lines,
Yeah.
it would be pages and pages. So those
Okay.
are actually if we will, like the titles, the code. Beneath those lines are other codes. So for example, I think
Okay.
the one that
That's
stands
what
out
I'm
is
talking
2110.
Yep,
It's 2110 is one that stands out. In one year, you're looking at a decrease of, I think, like $1 million, but then
Right.
or $2 million, but then you see an increase of almost the same amount.
so you're pulling out the, underneath the 2110, for instance,
Right.
you're pulling out the subcategories.
Exactly.
Some of them are increasing, some of them are decreasing, that's why they're on.
That's exactly
Okay.
right, and so it kind of writes
makes
itself, and
perfect
that's why
sense.
we provided the detail in our update, so
Got
you
it.
can see the actual lines and where this is happening.
Mhm.
But sometimes it's simply, so and what is it, the function code, the 4-digit?
Yes.
I'm getting good at this. The 4 digits is the function code, so the function's the same, but within that function, you have different lines.
Mhm.
So again, I'll use the Chromebook example, because that represented a $600,000 shift. For us to purchase Chromebooks, we used to purchase them directly from vendors, and we received no aid. So we shifted that line to a BOCES line, because if you purchase Chromebooks through BOCES, you're able to receive aid from that purchase, which again offsets that expenditure at the end of the year when we get reimbursement from BOCES.
So the main line is called the function code, but when you go underneath and that last 2 digits, what do you call those?
The last 2 digits are location, so 0 is the district,
Mhm.
1 I believe is the high school, and so on and so forth, there'll be 7. It's function, and then the other is, what's the 3-digit code?
Object,
The object.
Function, location, and object.
function, object, location.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's function, object, location.
Anybody else have questions for the superintendent? All right, I believe that,
Very good. So we talked a little bit about assessments earlier today, and sort of our push, which is kind of counter what we've heard for the last few years, and saying, no, let's have our students take the test and come in and do their best. What I've learned in working here for the last year and a half or 3, almost 2 years, and working with Beth Doyle and our directors and our administrators, is just how comprehensive our approach has been to making assessments of student achievement throughout the school year. It's pretty comprehensive, and it's a little mind-boggling as to the amount of work that's been done. But I'm not gonna steal any thunder away from Beth Doyle. I'm gonna call her up so that she can sort of talk about our programs. But I want to say this, in that when we look at data, you know, we're looking at it on an ongoing basis, and we try to individualize it as much as possible. And, you know, and she'll explain this a little bit more, but really the shift has gone from an RTI model, which stands for response intervention, which is purely academic, to a multi-tiered system of support, which is what we're going to talk about today, because we have to include not just the academic interventions, but social emotional interventions, because the world is in fact different, and the needs of our children are different. So I'll introduce Ms. Beth Doyle to take over and discuss our MTSS program.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Good evening, members of the Board of Education, the South Country community. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today because what I'll be showing you is really not a presentation per se, but this is really a demonstration of what it's like to live in our MTSS world. Before I start, I just wanted to give kudos and thanks to the MTSS committees. We have 3 district committees. There's the K-5 committee, a 6-8 committee, and a 9-12 committee, and that consists of our teachers and our administrators. We even embarked on this work, I think it was about 2.5 years ago. We started with an audit of our RTI program, and RTI, as Mr. Santana said, is response to intervention. And it was really a way to support students that were struggling, mainly in academics. K-5 is definitely ahead of the curve. Not to knock 612, K-5 was a mandate for many years, well before it was in 612. So we really took the practices in K-5 from RTI to extend them to this much more comprehensive approach of MTSS and then replicate that in the 612 world. So those teams have been really thoughtful in their approach and very honest about where we are. That audit highlighted some strengths, but definitely some gaps too, that we've been able to fill in over the last 2.5 years that I'm happy to present tonight. What you're looking at is something we call our MTSS Choice Board. So again, I did not create this. What I did is I took the 3, because we have 3 of them, 1 for each committee, and combined it into a K-12, but it was really a lot of copy and pasting. So this is a dashboard for our teachers and our staff to go to for everything related to MTSS. So when you go to this first page, what you'll see is this landing page, and each one of these boxes is a link that takes you to a resource to help you understand what MTSS is. So I'm going to walk through each one of these. Again, all of these are live links. So what is MTSS? As Mr. Santana explained, this is a much more comprehensive approach. This not only captures academics, but it also is supporting students behaviorally, social, emotionally, and attendance, which we know is a really big issue, especially after the pandemic. The purpose of this is to provide adequate and equitable support for our students. And we support students through these tiers, which I'm going to get into in a moment. But MTSS also is supporting our educators and our administrators to more effectively and efficiently support our students. Because this is extra work. You know, the tiers, as you'll see, require additional support for our students, which requires additional work for our staff. So we really needed to build a system that was streamlined and consistent across the district. And the audit highlighted that there wasn't consistent implementation, and now we feel like we're in a really good place where there is. So again, here's another link. I'm not going to open every one of these, but this is the actual choice board. So what that link on the bottom shows is just more detail of our overview, goals, and the purpose of MTSS. So I mentioned the tiers earlier. If you look at this diagram, what you see are those 3 circles are the 3 areas that MTSS covers. So social emotional learning, behavioral health and attendance, and academics. So again, RTI really just captured the academic piece. MTSS is comprehensive and captures all. And you see the circles that go around, this is an ongoing process. So we evaluate our students with screeners, which I'll talk about in a moment. We define what they need, we analyze our data, and we implement interventions, and the cycle continues. So what are these tiers? Tier 1 is core instruction. That's what every student gets. So core instruction are the learning standards from New York State that we teach to, the units that are aligned to those standards, the lessons and daily objectives that our teachers are teaching every day. It's what all of our students get, with differentiation, with supports to help our students within the classroom. Tier 2 is more strategic support. So that's extra support in meeting grade level expectations. And Tier 3 is the most intensive support. That's when we're remediating and targeting skills for students. So here's another way to look at this. Again, Tier 1 is core instruction. It's research and evidence-based. It's whole group instruction, but also includes small group with supports within the classroom through differentiation. All of our providers can deliver core 1 instruction. You'll see that there. And then the setting for Tier 1 is in the classroom. Tier 2 could be pull out or push in, depending on the grade level and the subject, and that's more targeted support with research-based interventions. And Tier 3 is much more individualized, again, using research-based interventions, and Tier 3 is a pull out. So we touched on this before. What is the difference between MTS and RTI? They share the same philosophies, but RTI is just a piece of MTSS. So if you look at that oval there, you'll see that RTI is part of MTSS. I want to show you this link because I feel like this really captures what it looks like. So MTSS is the umbrella, and under the umbrella, here's RTI, here are our MTSS teams, here's our professional development, our parent connection, curriculum design. PBIS was a positive behavior intervention supports. That's our Clipper Pride, our safe, respectful, and responsible, our SEL lessons are all captured under MTSS. So it's much more comprehensive and systematic approach to supporting students in our schools. The guiding principles of our MTSS are this. We screen all of our students using academic screeners and an SEL screener. And I'll talk more about what those screeners are in a moment. We have these tiered of interventions that amplify support. So the more support students need, the more intensive the support. There's ongoing data collection and progress monitoring that happens. There's a school-wide approach, like I just talked about, with positive behavior intervention supports, and of course our parents as partners. This is important to talk about the intersection of MTSS and IEP. So an IEP is an individual education plan. Students with special needs have an IEP. There is a misconception that MTSS is a way to slow down classification. And it's actually a way to substantiate an individual education plan. Because all the work that you do by intervening, collecting data, looking at assessments, monitoring progress, and seeing whether students are making progress or not is required anyway if you're moving to classification. So if students haven't responded to those interventions, they may be referred to special education. But all of this work needs to happen anyway. So you're really not wasting any time. You're in fact really digging deep and figuring out what the student needs. So the first guiding principle was around screeners. These are the screeners that we use for our students at South Country for reading, math, and SEL. Now this is comprehensive in that it's K-12. We don't use all of these for every student. Some of them are just secondary, some of them are elementary. But I'll quickly go through. Fontes and Pinnell is our reading assessment that we use in K through 6. We also use it in 7th and 8th for students that are in reading support. It determines their reading level. Scholastic Reading Tory also determines their reading level given a Lexile. We use NWA MAP for both reading and math. That's 3 times a year. It's a nationally normed assessment. We have a kindergarten screener. We have phonics and phonemic awareness screeners at K-5. We have a Spanish dual language assessment for students that are dual language to assess their language acquisition in their second language. We also use IXL as a reading diagnostic and a math diagnostic. That is something new that we have implemented based on our MTSS plan. And then we have a SEL screener, the DESA. That is also new. This is our first year with full implementation in grades K through 9. We piloted it for 2 years in a few grades. And that gives us really good information about how our students are doing social, emotionally, and behaviorally. So it may look like a lot, but it's not all at the same time. And again, this is for over K-12. This is just a document. Doesn't look very good on the screen there.
We use the 100%
Yeah, look.
on the top left.
Oh, yes, thank you. Still too big. So this is our assessment calendar. We make this every year. It's an internal document. You're really getting a deep look into our day-to-day here. So it's what assessment, when the window is, who's taking it, our report card matrix, our secondary assessment, so everybody has access to this. They know what it is. It's in every building's week ahead. It's on our shared calendar. So those are our assessments. MTSS, as I said, also covers behavior and social and emotional support for students. When we talk about MTSS or RTI, you often see this pyramid, and this gives a really good visual of what this looks like for our students. So tier 1, as we said, is core instruction, and this goes for academics and behavior. Core instruction in tier 1 captures 75 to 95% of our students. So the things that we do on a daily basis for all of our students will work for 75 to 90% of our students. Tier 2 is more intensive for behavior. That may be implementing the lessons that we have in our DESA platform. It may require non-mandated counseling, more interventions, and that's 10 to 25% of our students. And then tier 3, about 3 to 5% of our students may require a functional behavior assessment or a BIP, a behavior intervention plan, or some other counseling. But this framework is the same exact percentages that we use for academics as well. I thought it was a good visual to see what these tiers mean. So for behavioral support, we have the proactive classroom strategies. So this is tier 1, what all teachers should be doing in their classrooms. We have a document. Again, I'm going to make this smaller, that all of our staff have access to. So there's this whole list of classroom strategies, how it can be taught, how they collect data. And this was created by our teachers to support our teachers. You can see it's very comprehensive. So they'll use those proactive classroom strategies in tier 1, model and teach the strategies. And then we, as I said, we screen all of our students using the DESA 3 times per year. The DESA will help us identify students in 3 areas. They categorize them as either strength, typical, or needs instruction. And then students that are in instruction may take part in a DESA lesson, which is an SEL lesson. I'm going to show you quickly what the platform looks like for DESA. Oh, maybe not. I'm supposed to have my login there. Basically, it shows, it's very easy to use, it's color coded, it'll show a bar chart. This group of students needs extra support, these kids are good, these kids are really good. So the kids in need of extra support, it has actual lessons that the teachers can implement in the classroom right in the platform. So it's a very easy, user-friendly tool. So when students are not responding to tier 1, the teachers may refer them to the MTSS committee. Every building has an MTS committee, and they would fill out this initiation form, which I'll show you later. And then if they're not responding to tier 2, they'll go through the MTSS committee to talk about next steps and other interventions that they can put in place.
Ms. Dora, I have a question. So
Yes.
is that the only way a student can get referred to the MTSS committee is through a teacher recommending them?
No, they could also, administrator could recommend them based on their data.
How about their parents? Can their parents recommend them?
Absolutely, yeah, and parents are brought into this process for sure. Absolutely, it's comprehensive. You'll see on the form, it'll say, how was the student recommended? Was it through a universal screener? Was it a teacher recommendation? We don't have parent recommendation on the initiation form, but that's absolutely always considered. Thank you for that question. Then this is just another resource for teachers that really gets into what PBIS is and how to implement that in your classroom through MTSS. Something else that we did with the committees was when we started on this work after we did our audit, we realized we really needed to norm our terms and have a shared understanding of what all these things mean. So this is a glossary of key terms here for universal screening. What is a targeted assessment? What does it mean to analyze data? What does it mean to implement an intervention? How do we progress monitor students? So that was a lot of the work that we did with our consultant from PLC Associates, so we were all on the same page. So that's really the content, the overview, the resources for teachers to understand what MTSS is. This page here is the dashboard where you go if you need additional support for your students. So this is the what happens next page. So every single one of these boxes, again, is a link. So instead of going through each link, I thought it would be helpful to go through a scenario with a student. So this is a fictitious name and picture. I just Googled 8th grade student and put a picture there. However, the scenario is representative of an actual student in our district. So the name was changed, the picture was changed, but the scenario is a student in our district. Teachers' names were changed as well. So I'm going to walk you through Cecilia's story and show you what it would look like for a teacher to bring her to the MTSS committee. So Cecilia is currently in 8th grade. She is not part of MTSS. She enjoys music and art and dreams of being a performer like her favorite artist, Olivia Rodrigo, who I'm going to see on Friday at Madison Square Garden. Maybe Cecilia will be there. She's an English language learner at the expanding level, and she's been in our district since kindergarten. During the pandemic, when she was in 4th grade, she did not attend remote learning. This has contributed to gaps in instruction in both reading, writing, and math. She's reading on a 5th grade level, and as a result, she was recommended for the reading support class in 6th, 7th, and now 8th grade. Her ELA teacher, Ms. Smith, noticed that even with reading support, Cecilia was still struggling to engage in on-grade level content. Ms. Smith differentiates for Cecilia by providing her with similar texts on her instructional level and provides scaffolds by pre-teaching key vocabulary, but has not seen adequate progress. Cecilia is starting to exhibit behaviors in class. Ms. Smith brought her concerns to a member of the MTSS committee. So the member of the committee at the middle school spoke with the teacher. They are a great resource for teachers. The secondary level is very different because you're relying on folks to be case managers. You know, when you have just one class all day, it's easier to do this work. But at 612, you know, there are folks that are just willing to step up and be the case manager for students. So we appreciate that very much. So the MTS committee supports the teacher and the case manager through this process. So they would take them to this choice board, take them to the flow chart. So this is middle school, so they would go to the middle school flow chart and go through the steps to ensure that they did everything that they should before it goes to a meeting. So, wow, I can't read that. Now I know what it means for Centennial.
Fit, up, fit.
All right. So the first step is that we review data from the previous year. That was done. We know that because Cecilia is in a reading support class. Next, we look at student data from the prior school year and the articulation cards, any universal screeners. There's our assessment calendar again. The third step is the teacher differentiates in the class, which as Ms. Smith was doing, as we said in the scenario, she was pre-teaching vocabulary, using text on her instructional level. The next step is to reach out to a member of the MTS committee, and that's where we are right now with this scenario. So the MTSS team member would support the teacher with choosing an intervention to implement in the class for 4 to 6 weeks. These are all links to support to support with choosing an intervention. So since Cecilia is struggling in ELA, we would go to the literacy toolkit and scroll down to vocabulary, because that's the area where she was struggling. And then she would choose a specific intervention based on her data. So if, say, for example, she wants to work with Cecilia on using context clues to understand the meaning of words, she could use any of these resources with Cecilia to implement the intervention and progress monitor her on that intervention. So it's a very rich resource, and we have one for every academic area, and for behavior as well. All teacher created, really great, rich resource. So for 6 weeks, she implements the intervention. We have 2 ways we can go. If she's not making sufficient progress, then she would fill out the MTSS referral form, which is at the middle school, they're using a Google form. So the student name, date of birth, school year, grade level. This is where I was talking about trustee Trent, teacher referral or universal screener. We should add parent referral in there. Thank you for that feedback. Who's referring, the household language, the academic subject, what their progress monitoring, the academic concern, the data points, if it's behavioral, what the behavioral concerns are, how does the student approach, react to the area of concern, attendance, do they have a 504, or are they an L, do they receive E&L services, do they receive AIS, anything else? It's very comprehensive, we ask a lot of questions. And then teachers asked to bring this data to the initial meeting. Evidence of the intervention, their portfolios, samples of student work, anecdotals, their data, and then a behavior intervention plan if applicable. So all that is brought to the MTSS committee. A meeting is scheduled, they review the intervention data, they collaborate on next steps, whether that's to continue the intervention, choose a new intervention, or make other modifications. And then that's implemented for 4 to 6 weeks. This is when the parents are brought in to talk about what's happening with their child and make sure they're aware.
So I have a question, I'm sorry. Can you, right there, it says 4 to 6 weeks of the meeting. When, how soon, on average, is a meeting set up after a child is recommended to the committee? That first meeting, how often is that after that recommendation?
It depends, I think, it was hard for me to say, because every building is different. I know in my experience, it would be probably 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, because you already have a schedule of kids that are in MTSS, so you have to find an opening, do you know what I mean? Because it's a 4 to 6 week cycle. And then there's time constraints on how many kids you can fit into a meeting, because these meetings are happening during the school day.
But does our demand for meetings ever go over our capacity? Do we ever have students waiting, double what is normal, the 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, I know in my experience, there were times where, I had to extend RTI meeting, we'd have to block out a whole Friday morning because of that exact reason. To catch up and make sure that we were not waiting too long to catch kids. So we're flexible that way, because, to your point, we want to be responsive. If we have this information, we have to intervene as soon as possible.
Okay, that's good, thank you.
You're welcome. And then the cycle would continue. If the student is making sufficient progress, we ask the teacher to continue the intervention for another cycle, meet again, just to make sure that wasn't a blip. And then if they're closing the gap, then they would be removed from MTSS, which is the best case scenario. All right. So that's Cecilia. Now this is Alex. So Alex is currently in MTSS. Again, name has been changed, picture has changed, but this is an actual student in our district. Alex is a current 3rd grader at Creamer Street. He's an energetic, bright boy that loves dinosaurs. Alex is struggling academically in reading and writing. His attendance is a concern as he's been absent 18 times, which is considered chronically absent. He began the year reading on an end of kindergarten reading level, is currently on the beginning of second grade level, so he is making progress. Based on his data, Alex receives tier 3 reading support. The reading specialist works on his phonics gaps. In the classroom, he is instructed in small groups to work on target skills from his teacher. The teaching assistant also works with him on sight words. His sight work in coding is improving. At the MTSS meeting, the teachers shared Alex's progress based on his current assessment data. So I'm gonna just show you what it looks like for a student that's actually in the RTI process. There we go. So this is the RTI planner. So this happens, I'm sorry, I'm using RTI and MTSS interchangeably. This is the MTSS planner. So this is the document that's completed at the K-5 level during the meeting. But you'll see here's was Alex's initial referral. This is the same thing that I showed you in the Google form, but that K-5 uses a Google Doc. But it's the
So
same question.
This planner is at the follow-up meeting.
This is the follow-up meeting, yep. So the referral form will be in the planner, the initial referral. Don't worry, Mr. Clark, I redacted names. This is Kramer's actual RTI spreadsheet. Every school has one of these. So this is a Google sheet with every student that's currently in the MTSS process at Kramer. You'll see the teacher, their area of concern, the cohort, the date the email was received, the point person, the intervention date and the type of intervention, and then here's the meeting schedule. So that is kept right.
So you can actually track
Mhm.
those meetings and how long people are waiting to be, okay.
Yep, that's the exact point. And it's in this document so that when we have the meeting, we're scheduling the next meeting and putting it right in that document. And then here, I took the names out, but these would be the actual people's names. So the literacy coach, the reading specialist, the classroom teacher, and the teaching assistant are all part of this meeting. I left out the social worker was also part of this meeting. The students' data, so their reading level, their MAP scores, a printout right from MAP of Alex's reading. So he's at a 154. His growth is below mean, his achievement is below mean, and he's projected to receive a level 1 on the state test this year. This is his Lexile reading level, and these are focus areas of instruction for the teacher. This is all in the NWA platform. This is the intervention that they've been working on with Alex, high frequency words. They actually are amazing and put the lesson plan right in here that they were using with Alex. The reading teacher, reading specialists do something called Rally, try it, sorry.
You said that they were amazing. Do they often put the, what do you call that, the curriculum in there?
Yes. So this is the plan that they use for high frequency words. It's basically a lesson plan. And then this is the progress monitoring form that they use to progress monitor how they're doing on the assessment. So what is the focus? What are the target words? Put the number correct out of the number assessed, list the words that have been repeatedly targeted in instruction, and additional notes. So that's how they progress monitor after they give the assessment. And the data is captured right in that form, which goes into a Google sheet. Then what is here below are the meeting notes. So they met on December 19th. They discussed that it was a slow start due to Alex's absences. Decided to chunk the list. I'm not going to read all of this, but these are their actual notes. Classroom teacher reports out. Teaching assistant reports out. They talk about next steps. There's a resource for high frequency words. It's referred to the attendance committee. Reading teacher reported out, and then the social worker reported out as well and recommended Alex is put in a counseling group and is going to reach out to mom. This is the RIT score scales, so just as a reference, Alex was at a 154 as a third grader, so you can see that he's below grade level there. That's the NWA scores. So that's the plan, to, you know, adjust the intervention using these resources, and then they would go back into the spreadsheet, set the next meeting date, and typically, you know, they circle back to ensure that everyone's, you know, clear on what the intervention is, who's doing the intervention, who's doing the progress monitoring, and they all are aware of when the next meeting is.
Ms. Wood, can you just scroll down for me?
Sure.
Those two, all the way down. The NWEA and the RIT, I remember the MWEA presentation, but the RIT, I don't remember that. Have
So-
you?
It's like another language.
Oh, so they're the same thing?
They are the same thing.
Okay.
So the NWA is the assessment, the score is called the RIT score. Yes, and it's a measure of growth. So, you know, the best way to describe it and the way that I make sense of it is, you know, did anyone have, they would mark their height on the wall in their house, you know, and see how they grow every year and where, so that's really it, it's measuring growth over time. But then it's also comparing to your peers at that grade level nationally, because it's a nationally normed test. So that it's a very complicated scale score.
But you're gonna teach us one day how to interpret that.
I'm gonna need a refresher before I do that. But yes, good question. So that's basically how it works. So, you know, if Cecilia wasn't in MTSS, Alex is, and then the cycle just continues. You know, the best case scenario is that we're closing those gaps, and that, you know, students are reaching grade level expectations, but some students may require referral to special education. That brings me to, you know, something else that we uncovered doing this MTSS work. There were some structural things that we needed to take a look at. So when we started this work, it was right after the pandemic, and our data was showing that many of our K-5 students were reading below grade level. And the way that we were doing RTI was a pull-out model. So our reading specialists, math specialists were pulling the students out of kids. There were frankly too many kids to pull out of class because so many kids were behind. So we shifted to a push-in model last year at the K-5 level for reading and math. And when I said that reading teachers are amazing, they are, because this took a lot of flexibility on their part to change practice, to be able, you know, to deliver instruction in a way that they haven't before, to be able to co-teach with many different people. And thankfully, at mid-year, our data showed that it was working, that our kids were really making progress. So their flexibility and their willingness and thoughtfulness to engage in this, all that work you saw, those lesson plans, those progress monitoring forms, that's the work of our literacy coaches and our reading specialists who've really done a tremendous job. Yes,
So how do you track that they're making progress in only half the year?
those assessments that I talked about.
Which ones? Can you be
So where are
specific?
those numbers, yes.
Yeah, so it's the F&P level, their reading levels, their phonics assessments. I mean, I don't have the data off the top of my hand, but
But that's what I would like to see, that, like, just
Sure.
the proof and the improvement.
yeah, absolutely. So that, what we looked at is that was really triage and early intervention. Making sure that we're catching our kids early, and because we know if they're not reading on grade level, that they're playing catch up the rest of their academic career. They're not reading on grade level by third grade. That really has to be the focus. We know, of course, that we have kids that come to us in middle school and high school. And we need to support them just like the rest of our kids. But the majority of our students start with us at elementary level, and our focus really should be on early intervention. So this highlighted that need and this need for us to come up with our vision for reading. So early intervention, making sure that we're using evidence-based programs and practices, using data to inform our moves and our instructional moves. using culturally responsive practices that are meaningful and relevant for our diverse students, building out this gradual release of responsibility, which means moving away from teacher-directed to more student-centered learning, so students are doing the majority of the thinking, and of course, building a love of reading. That this shouldn't just be a skill, that we really want kids to find the joy in the pursuit of reading. So with that vision, we made some changes to our reading support structure. And one, to align it with an MTSS program. And that's what you see right here. So tier 1, again, is core instruction. It's what all of our students get. It's daily instruction. Tier 2 is strategic targeted intervention. So that this is for K-12, but there's some nuances in here depending on the grade level band. So tier 2 could be push-in, as I mentioned, at K-5, and also for AIS, Academic Intervention Services, is a mandate from the New York State Education Department. It's dependent on how our students do on our state assessments. So if a student scores a certain scale score, they're required to receive AIS. So that's a push-in for ELA and math. At the middle school, we will do a targeted support pullout for reading. And that would be every other day to be aligned with the tiers. Tier 3 is much more intensive. That's where we would have daily reading support for our students. And what you see there are a list of programs that we possibly could use. What's very exciting about this is that we are taking a much more individualized approach to reading instruction. And this requires some creative scheduling, and it's not going to be something that we just roll over every year because we're being very responsive to the kids that are in front of us. So building this schedule every year, is really going to, reading is going to drive it. Because we have to see where the kids are using their assessment data and what they need. So for example, we have these programs here. If you're a student that doesn't need comprehension, then we shouldn't be using the LLI program with them. We should be using a phonics program if that's where their needs are. So we're really building these tier 3 daily support classes based on what our kids need. And this is going to require some professional development for our teachers. Sunday is new. We just introduced it this year to our special ed teachers. We've been using LLI, we've been using Just Words, special ed's been using Fast Forward. But again, we're going to ensure that our kids are getting what they need and that they are making progress based on their individual needs. So that, to us, this was the silver lining in MTSS, because it really allowed us to take a deep dive into the structure, and it felt like we were almost giving kids too much and not allowing them, especially in tier 2, you shouldn't have reading every day if you're a tier 2 student. And this allows you to take other classes like music and art and things that you may enjoy, and because that's not a support that you need, why would we lock up your schedule like that? But again, it's driven by data. It's going to be very flexible based on what your data is telling us. Any questions on that?
Do the kids in tier 3 still have an availability to take some of the electives, like music or art?
Not really. The good news is the way that we're structuring this is that it's unfortunate for the students that are in tier 3. However, we had many students in tier 3 that didn't need to be in tier 3. And we're adding skills classes, Mr. Santana said, that will support students that are in inclusion classes. Students that are in self-contained, reading will now be within their classroom. If you have resource room, you won't also have reading. So there's things that we did. So this will be a smaller group of students, but yes, if you are in tier 3, you most likely won't have that room in your schedule.
So is the idea that with the more intense effort at the younger grades, you will have less kids going to the older grades that are going to need significant intervention?
So this is just some more interventions that we have in addition to reading, small group instruction, and this is K-5, reading push-in, pull-out, math push-in. We have our elementary extended day program for reading and math, elementary summer school program for reading, math, and STEM. The DESA lessons are those SEL lessons, and of course our behavioral interventions for behavior plans. At 6:12, small group instruction, reading, push in, pull out. We have our math support classes in 6th grade. WIN was added this year, whatever I need. We also have math lab classes, 7:12. Humanities support classes. We have AIS for reading and math. The skills class is new for next year at the middle school. And of course, our after-school extra help, our study center, our Regents Review, credit recovery, and our secondary summer school programs. And along with that, this is highlighting some of our professional learning, really the ones that align with MTSS. Our partner, Teachers College Advancing Literacy, has been really responsive to our needs. Our work with Susan Resnick, who's a national consultant, one of the authors of Math in Focus, which is the program that we use, has been great in helping us build the WIN program and with our instruction across the district. Jack Burke has been working with teachers on building thinking classrooms in open middle math. We had PD on IXL reading and math. We work with Michelle Casano and PLC Associates on E&L instructional strategies. Our literacy coaches have been leading the charge with the science of reading by doing professional learning using the book Shifting the Balance, which is about the 6 shifts. Chris Albrecht, our director of instructional technology, has been done some sessions on artificial intelligence. We've had PD on the DESA, crisis prevention, intervention, restorative practices, second step, our KA-SEL program, our new partnership with Northwell for SEL and mental health, and of course our new initiative this year where teachers are engaging in teacher-driven professional development through their professional learning communities. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment that, a lot of this is new, and as a result, it's a really collaborative effort between teachers, and I really want to give a shout out to our teachers and our participants in this process. It's challenging work, and, our assessment scores aren't where they should be, and that's what really prompted, or was the inspiration behind all of this. But, to say that, we're failing our kids, and I've heard community members make comments like that, I think it's so inaccurate. I think we're responding to a pandemic, we're responding to, a community of kids that have, extenuating circumstances and needs, and this is kind of designed, like the amount of resources are available, and I don't work for Google, I don't have stock in Google, but the fact that you can digitize it and have active links and resources for teachers at their fingertips is pretty amazing. Because all these documents are live and they're cloud-based. So I just want to give, again, accolades to Beth Doyle, I know Jackie O'Hagan's here, Sean Clark, and Pat Brady representing our teachers and other staff members, because it really has been a collective effort, and it's new. And so, I don't really expect to see a huge shift in achievement that rapidly, but the idea is to really start tracking this long-term and seeing its effectiveness. And it has to be a fluid process where we make assessments and we look at it and we say what works and what doesn't work. But I've never seen anything like this in my career. And I've never seen such an individualized approach with so many resources. I always kid around, when I first started teaching, I had chalk and a blackboard. And that's where it began and ended for me. And so it's amazing that, through our entire team, we're able to create this sort of comprehensive approach. So I'm really proud of it.
I just have a question. It's difficult for me to see that those things be realized when we're reducing the reading staff in the middle school. I get the presentation, I understand, our testing, but I would think that more staff, more specifically reading teachers, would help with that. Like I'm not convinced that you would be able to still provide the same, reading infrastructure for our middle school students, whether they're in tier 1 or tier 3, by reducing the staff by 2 whole people. For me, that's a little difficult to.
The best way I can explain it is there were too many kids that were classified or in tier 3 receiving too many interventions that also works sort of, it almost has like an adverse effect on the process. And really, it's really shifting the focus to the elementary schools, because you want kids to be reading a grade level by grade 3. So you can't look at it as a reduction in staff, but an addition of more targeted support, because they're actually getting more in this in this format. So it's kind of and I get it, that logically, when you say, wait, we're going from 8 teachers to 6, how does that make sense? But it's much more targeted, and there are other players who are taking on some of these responsibilities, whether it's the skill classes, which is not reading teachers, it's special education teachers, or the content teachers, and the fact that we're teaching literacy in all of our content classes.
No, I get that you're targeting, I get that. But in order to target, that means you have to take some staff from over here, put them over here to do specific things that you weren't doing before. Now, when you take from over here, those students those resources are gonna be taken away from those students. What additional resources will you have, or do they not need those additional resources?
I'm gonna say both.
Actually, can I just jump in on that a little bit? Because I understood, I had the same question that you did 2 weeks ago. But then as I listened to more of what we were doing, I understood it a little bit differently as time went on. That constant reinforcement of reading wasn't helping with achievement. That actually giving students like more opportunity in other classes for reading comprehension, so on and so forth, was going to help with overall reading, not specifically the reading, and why the shifting of it was, and we weren't reducing teachers, we were shifting teachers to the lower grades to help with what you just explained all year. So then it made more sense to me that, oh, okay, so if I'm having a reading comprehension problem and you're gonna drill reading into me 5 periods a day, where I'm gonna have another class that's also gonna teach me comprehension, but it's not gonna be under the heading of reading. I'm going to understand comprehension, which is going to improve my reading, but not under the class of reading. Is that more accurate as to what we were doing
Yes.
with the shifting of the reading
Yes.
teachers?
We also added the skills component
Yeah.
through special ed that really targets those 3 care. So we actually added support as well. When you look at our staffing proposal, we increased our staffing in special education. One, because there's a class moving up with faculty long, so that's part of it, but also to add these skills classes. So we did the targeted reading instruction through our special education classes. So it's not just removing, it's shifting and adding in a different way.
And putting the kids in the right class with the right program. And using multiple measures to determine what that is.
Yeah, the appearance in the presentation gave us cause for alarm, on its initial, on face value. But then after we did a deeper dive, I understood it a little bit better. And then this presentation, made it even more important to understand the shift into the lower grades to catch them before they get to the higher grades. And I agree with you. So much more goes on behind the scenes that people don't realize, the support that our students are getting, and much more. It really gives us a level of comfort of how much work we're doing here. And like the superintendent said, it's a collaborative effort between your office, the directors, the teachers, the principals.
Yes.
The teamwork is endless, and then the ability to track. And I think it would be important for the Board of Education to see the performance, and even though it might be small right now, the increase, the changes and the improvement, but it would be important to see, how those changes are happening, and even if they're slight.
Yep.
Okay.
And we're also 2 years out of this pandemic, and I hate mentioning it over and over again. We just celebrated the 4-year anniversary of the closure of our schools. But those 2 years of lost instruction are really impactful. And I think the first year, and when I think about the 22-23 school year, we're still kind of figuring it out. And what was the actual impact? And I feel like that process is ongoing. Above and beyond the academic, sort of gaps that created, it's also the social emotional gaps from the isolation. We're sort of all still kind of dealing with it, learning about it, and I think it's going to be a fluid process. I don't know if this is, the right approach, but certainly we have a lot of tools to use, and with progress monitoring is really what is going to be telling.
No, and you're so right, because we even talk about, people who had babies during that time. You know, the babies themselves, we talk about, oh, that's my pandemic baby. I talk about it about my dog. My dog is a pandemic dog and is timid in certain situations because she didn't have the socialization of other dogs because of the pandemic. So you're right, there's so many aspects that we don't know how to measure.
And attendance
Attendance
has
is
been
huge.
impacted too. I think you shared, Mr. Santana shared the article from the Times, you know, schools now become optional. So how do you know, you saw with one of the scenarios, student that was chronically absent, we can intervene all we want, but if they're not in school, you know, what's the impact gonna be? So it's, you know, it's slower progress than we'd like.
And attendance has to be a focus because, again, prior to the pandemic, school wasn't a choice. You got up, you went to school. Like, we didn't really talk about it. Now there's like remote option and this ability, and even the CDC just changed the guidance where if you had any symptom, stay home, don't go to work, don't go to school. CDC just changed their guidance to saying, unless you're feverish and you could manage school, it's important that you're at work or at school. So we're sort of still kind of reeling from the after effects of this shift in mindset and the ease at which people just miss school. It really is a challenge.
Just from the, you know, first of all, thank you. I mean, this is great for individual students. You know, a terrific presentation to certainly educate us as far as what is needed. You know, I think all of this, though, seems, at least from my standpoint and what I do and everything that I do, the thing that's missing here for me, you know, is looking at, you know, the dashboard of how we're making change on a global station to better strengthen the students and better change those results. You know, I think maybe for a future presentation, maybe we look at, you know, what are those things, and that way we can start to look at, you know, as a community and create greater transparency for our community on the progress that we're making with our students as a district and as a program overall. You know, and I think that's, I mean, if this was based on my request for that type of things, I don't think this is necessarily where we're going to have the greatest impact. I mean, it's great to know that these things are going on with individual students, but you know, looking at, you know, what we're doing to strengthen the program overall, you know, I do think we need to look at where our statistics and how the changes that we're making are impacting.
So we go over that in October.
Yeah, I did
We
do
do
that
year-to-year
presentation
comparisons in
October.
October. So we did do that already this year in October, assessment presentation. And so annually, that's the October meeting is when we go over our data and we compare year to year.
I don't think we necessarily should be looking at it once a year if that's the case.
But we don't, well,
We
you know,
don't
we can certainly,
look
Real-
in a very real way. Yeah.
We look after every administration of every assessment.
a lot of it's based on the annual state assessments, and that's why we want to get a larger sample size. You know, when we look at opt-out rates for 8th grade and middle school, they're pretty significant, so we want to make sure our kids take the test and do their best. You know, it's, because again, I remember for my children, when there were like a handful of kids taking the test and everybody else opted out, they weren't putting their true effort in the tests, because the message has always been, these tests don't really matter, don't stress about it. And I feel like in many ways they do matter, because it's a reflection of the school district, and I think as a parent, you should want to know where your child compares to other kids in the state, to your point.
And where we stand as a district.
Any other questions for Ms. Doyle? Well, thank you again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you just hit Alt-Tab? Yeah. There you go. Thank you. You can leave it there.
All right, that brings us back to the consent agenda for business, which needs a recommendation from the superintendent.
Thank you, President Felice. The administration recommends approval of business items reflected in schedules E1 through E3.
Okay, we have a motion for E1 through 1 through 3. Trustee Trent, seconded by Trustee Barry. Any discussion, any further discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Seeing all hands raised, the motion passes unanimously. And now we are up to, wait a minute, we should have one more item, right? Nope, that's everything. Okay, that brings us up to item F, public commentary. Do we have any cards? There are no cards. That brings us to closing remarks by the board. Any closing remarks?
No.
No closing remarks. That brings us to adjournment. Is there a motion to adjourn? Don't raise your hands all at once. And so, Mrs. Barry first, trustee Barry, seconded by trustee Trent. Motion to adjourn, no discussion. All those in favor, raise your hands.